or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com workshop, brought to you by Techstrong, AWS, and CloudBees. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting workshop ahead, but first, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of this workshop, say you're just following along and you want to actually engage with the workshop itself at a later point in time, this session is being recorded. So you will receive the recording of this workshop shortly after we conclude, and it will be available on the DevOps website. We want you to use the chat section on the right side of your screen to send us any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, anything that you want to contribute to today's workshop. That chat section is going to be your avenue. And finally, at the conclusion of this webinar workshop, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. So our topic today is managing CI at scale with CloudBees. And joining me is Ian Kurtz, Solutions Architect for CloudBees, and helping us out in our comments section. So feel free to send in as many questions as you can. We have Sheng Xin, Director of Global Solutions Architecture at CloudBees. So Ian and Sheng, thank you both so much for being here with me. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Cody. And what you're looking at right now is sort of, the slide deck we'll be working off of today to give you an overview and an introduction into CloudBees, more specifically CloudBees CI, right? But yeah, so my name is Ian Kurtz. I've been with CloudBees Solution Architecture Organization for just over a year now. Formerly a DevOps engineer at Abbott Laboratories, and I use Jenkins a lot, from the perspective of an administrator, right? So I'm very familiar with a lot of the anti-patterns that we'll cover today, and how CloudBees can actually solve for, the challenges presented in open source with respect to scaling your CI environments in a secure and reliable fashion, and ultimately doing that in a cloud-native way, leveraging Kubernetes. And in this case, we're going to be in EKS today. You'll see I have about 4 different browser tabs open, but I guess before I actually get into the nitty-gritty, Sheng, did you want to do an introduction for yourself? I know Cody did it for us, but
yeah, sure. So I lead the global partner SA team here at CloudBees. 2 months new into CloudBees. I came over from VMware, and very excited to see DevOps really taking off and helping a lot of our customers doing their digital transformation along that journey. So please, everyone, feel free to comment on the side here. I'll try to monitor those. And if there's something urgent, we'll have Ian kind of pause or slow down a little bit and try to answer those questions. And I'll try to collect those questions as well so that we can get those answered if we can't get to them in person. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And I'll turn it back to Ian. Thanks.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you, everyone, for your time today. So I have just navigated over to the second tab that I have open here in Chrome, and that is the workshop instructions. So today we're going to be covering module 1, right? And so I'm taking a look at our CI environments from the lens of a shared services administrator. Maybe I'm a sysadmin on, a center of excellence team, and we're using open source Jenkins or CloudBees CI. And we want to learn more about how we can make that solution, how we can make that architecture more sustainable. So what we've done is provided a series of labs to kind of paint that picture for you. One of which is pipeline template catalogs. So understanding what those are, how we can create these repeatable software delivery workflows. You'll see configuration as code is a very large component to the CloudBees CI solution as well. And that plays a massive role across all 4 of the labs that we're going to be covering today. The last 2 labs surrounding pipeline policies and delegating administration capabilities with RBAC are things that can serve a system administrator or a shared services team very well. And again, this is all centered around how we can do this efficiently, securely and with speed at scale. I will jump over into just sort of an overview of CloudBees and what it is that CI offers. First and foremost, what CloudBees CI is. We are built on the long-term support release of the open source Jenkins software, right? So many of you know CloudBees as the enterprise Jenkins sponsor, right? Which we are, right? We still are that. We offer a complete end-to-end DevOps platform today. But we're going to be focused on CI, right? Enterprise Jenkins, how we can ultimately, do that at scale. And what CloudBees provides you with is it really a way to eliminate the silos and empower your teams that are the consumers of your toolchain applications. Here specifically CI, right? You'll see as we start to go into the labs and as you get familiar with the CloudBees CI solution, exactly how we solve that, through what we call Operations Center, really the governor of all of your different CI environments. So these are really some of the central pillars to how CloudBees really thinks about managing continuous integration at scale and continuous delivery, right? So there's two really popular anti-patterns in open source. One of those is the monolithic monster, right? This huge Jenkins instance, we call it Jenkinstein. Scalability is very limited. Resource utilization is extremely high. You're running into performance issues. And when teams see that, they might tend to go rogue and say, you know what, I'm fed up with the plugin dependencies, the performance issues on this server. I'm going to go out and I'm going to create my own Jenkins instance. And that creates this island, right? This sprawl of servers that can be really hard to gain visibility into. You don't have the right governance. That's exactly where CloudBees steps in with CI. So we provide you with this sort of project isolation while still having visibility into that project. They get their own lightweight controllers, right? And you'll see that within the workshops today. Workloads can be distributed. Resources can be shared a lot easier with this type of distributed pipeline architecture. It scales, especially when you talk about hosting it in something like Elastic Kubernetes service hosted by Amazon. And you can really reduce the impact or the blowback of a failure or a misconfiguration when you have that governance, when you have that scalability in play. And what we're seeing here is CloudBees CI on really just any sort of generic Kubernetes architecture. The deployment options for CloudBees CI are extremely flexible. That can be on-premise, that can be in the cloud, and I'm sure a large audience here is familiar with Amazon or AWS. And as I said, today we'll actually be seeing CloudBees CI, and we'll be experimenting with its features in a hosted EKS cluster. Now, this is the architecture, right? This is sort of how all of the resources are working together behind the scenes to give us the scalable architecture that we can use to support production environments, right? Everything is decoupled. And with the nature of Kubernetes, you have that sort of built-in fault tolerance with pod autoscaling, cluster autoscaling, et cetera. And we'll see a lot of those benefits with respect to CloudBees CI and using that within EKS today. Just a couple of more things to hit on as it relates to actually managing Jenkins at scale. CloudBees CI being built on the long-term support version of it. One of the biggest problems, right, in open source is, hey, we are having problems, testing plugins, ensuring they're compatible across all these different instances so that teams can just consume them very easily and start to use them within their pipelines. we take a lot of that load off of your shoulders in the CloudBees Assurance program. So we actually ensure that you're using the most up-to-date and secure versions of those plugins that you need via monthly security releases. Okay. Configuration as code, like I said, you're going to see the true power of that and why you should use configuration as code with CloudBees CI to really make your lives easier in terms of reducing the management and the administrative overhead across these instances. But really what we do, right, we enable you to scale, and we enable you to do that intelligently. You can easily provide, via the user interface, what we call managed controllers. And you can think of these as open source Jenkins masters. The open source Jenkins project actually recently changed verbiage from master to controller. So whenever you hear me saying controller today, you would think of what is formerly known as a Jenkins master. So creating those on demand through the user interface, being able to centralize an RBAC off Z strategy across an entire production cluster, and much more that we'll be getting into throughout the labs today. Now, I realize that we have a couple of, about just under 2 hours and a lot of content to cover. So what I think is a really good use of your time today, as opposed to going through the setup for a lot of these labs, and you should be able to access this information, I think it is most beneficial for you to soak in all the knowledge and sort of observe me as I navigate through these labs, as I talk through the concepts that CloudBees CI employs. But like I said, if you would like to sort of go through the pre-workshop setup, some of you may have already done that. We will actually be using a GitHub app to copy over certain repositories into your GitHub organization. And those are going to be the basis for completing the labs today, as we'll get into. The instructions are available at the link you see on the screen, and I'll be navigating to those very, very shortly as we begin the first lab, which kind of touches on managing pipelines at scale. As a shared services team, as a DevOps team, I want really well-written pipelines to be available for the consumers of our platform. So, before we get our feet wet with pipeline templates, this is just kind of an overview of those repositories that are getting copied over, into your GitHub organization. Again, I really do think that, for time's sake and, for getting the most value out of today, just simply observing, what I'm doing will be extremely beneficial for you. So I will navigate back on over to module 1. And like I said, we'll start with pipeline template catalogs. And, if you've ever been an administrator of a Jenkins instance, some of you who are attending today might be in that position, right? How can we, supply a catalog, a series of well-written CI/CD workflows or automation workflows in the form of pipelines? How can we make those available across the teams that we support in a standardized way, right, that we can easily reproduce? You can't do that in open source, and I would challenge you to sort of show me how you would be able to do that in a way that CloudBees handles it, right? And this is how CloudBees CI handles that. It's through this concept. Pipeline template catalogs are really, version controlled. I'm going to go forward here. There we are. They're version controlled, parameterized templates for multi-branch and standalone pipeline jobs. Okay, so they really help ensure that your organization is conforming to the right policies, the right standards that you want to enforce within these software delivery workflows within your pipelines. So you can provide your developers with a very, very directed experience for configuring pipelines, and you don't want your developers to be consuming all of their time writing pipelines or debugging pipelines. You want those to be available so that the learning curve is extremely small, and all they have to do is execute those so that they can focus on application code. So as we go through the first lab of actually setting up a pipeline template catalog, you'll see just how easy it is to actually make those available across a cluster of controllers. So we will navigate back to the pipeline template catalogs lab. And again, feel free to just observe what I'm doing and to ask any questions via the chat. This is meant to be interactive. So I think what we want to do first is simply just sort of explore what exactly the pipeline template catalog consists of, and how we're actually defining the catalog. There's multiple different ways that we can actually install it or set it up. What we're doing is creating the pipeline template catalog through a configuration as code bundle, which can be very, very powerful at scale, especially in production where you're supporting a lot of different teams. They each have their own controller, but they might want the same set of pipelines available on those controllers. So that's sort of the exercise that we're going to be going through today. Here's my GitHub organization. And as you see, I already have all of those repositories. I can take a look at the configuration as code bundle. And right away, I'm faced with a series of YAML manifests. We won't go deep into these during this lab. We will in the next lab as we start to discuss the concept of configuration as code and why that's so important in terms of reducing human error and just manual prone errors. What we want to take a look at, though, is our Jenkins.yaml file here. So what this allows you to do is specify literally all of your global settings as code. Anything you see within the Manage Jenkins page in the user interface, you can effectively define as code within a file like this, right? So you're saying, okay, Ian, we have some environment variables we might be setting for our controller, a system message. Oh, and here, okay, so here's the pipeline template catalog that we want to use for my particular controller. And there's some things to note. So, here's a branch specifier for our pipeline template. It's going to live on the main branch. And here's the source code management configuration for it. So any update to the pipelines within this catalog should automatically be applied not only to the CloudBees CI instance, but to each and every job that uses those pipeline templates. So we're just specifying the sort of authentication details here. But again, this is defined as code. And once we apply this configuration bundle to our controller, we know that this pipeline template catalog with a series of, a variety of different workflows is already available on our controller day 0. So going back to the instructions, you'll also notice too that, the GitHub organization variable are basically placeholders. So as my managed controller is being provisioned in EKS as a stateful set, these variables are going to be replaced with the actual GitHub organization value that applies to your environment. So let's, Ian, show us CloudBees CI, right? Let's actually start to take a look at how we can manage these environments at scale. What we're looking at is, oh my gosh, you're saying, wait, this is Jenkins. This is CloudBees CI. So again, we are built on the long-term support release of Jenkins, right? What we offer are proprietary enterprise features that get you into a position of scale, of reliability, and you have a heightened level of security. One of those, enhancements to governance is through this massive addition to the platform called Operations Center. So right away, as soon as I log in, I get this single, pane of glass view into all of my CI controllers. And by the way, they're actually, the ones that are idle and might not be utilized, those are hibernating. So that's also a proprietary service that you'd be able to enable within, CloudBees CI Helm chart, so that if these CI environments are just sitting idle, past a certain period that you define, we can spin that down, right? We can spin the replica set down and effectively save on compute costs. So that's what we're seeing here, right? As soon as I log in, and I'm logged in as the admin, which is why I have a view into all of these environments. I have a pretty direct view into just how many controllers are saving me on infrastructure costs. So the power of Operations Center will be seen throughout the different labs today. Really, really cool feature as far as being able to just create on-demand instances as well as we see here. Now, I'm going to log in as the user that I installed the GitHub organization with. So it'd be my GitHub username. That's going to be password for the workshop. I now have a different view. So you can see that we've applied an RBAC strategy, and I just have these two controllers that I have access to, right? And I'll click into the managed controller that we're going to be working off of today. We saw that system message, right? So for those who have sort of an eagle eye, you'll know that this was actually defined in that Jenkins.yaml file we just reviewed here in source control. So we'll come back to this configuration as code bundle very, very shortly within the next lab. At the very least, we know that this instance is using Cask. And boy, don't you know it, we have a pipeline template catalog that's been made available on this instance. And this was just installed. So not only is it configured as code, this entire system, but we have some readily available pipelines that certain teams can begin to execute on. A lot of these are, as you can imagine, typical CI, continuous delivery automation tasks for Python, for Maven, for our React or Node builds. Now, okay, that's a really cool GitOps approach for software delivery, but what about managing this instance? How can I maybe enforce a pipeline template to do that? And you'll see us actually leverage this configuration bundle, multi-branch pipeline template, to update the configuration as code bundle for your controller. So what I'm getting at here is, sure, pipeline templates are awesome and most widely used for CI/CD workflows, but they can be created for a wide variety of automation tasks. And we know that if we visit the import log, we're looking good. It was able to connect to my source code repository. And we have a healthy catalog up and running on this controller. Now, going back to the instructions, we've reviewed the health and the status of the pipeline template. Now we actually want to begin to use them, or at the very least, ensure that those templates are restricted to a specific folder. And this is also a really, really neat feature of CloudBees CI, something you don't really see in open source Jenkins, is the ability to restrict and enable certain items at the folder level. So with CloudBees, the use of folders are still extremely powerful. In fact, if I go back and I log in as the administrator user again, just going to grab the password here. And no, I do not have LastPass set up on Chrome, unfortunately. But I'll log in as the admin again. And what we can view is, if we go to the root level of Operations Center, we're doing exactly that. We're using folders actually to organize all of our workshop environments, right? So, and that allows you to, again, restrict and enable certain things at the folder level, something you can't really do in open source. And you don't have the visibility into all of these different environments at a global level. So I'll navigate back to my controller as the user that I would want to be. And again, we want to enforce the use of these pipeline templates that we've just imported at the folder level. So we're going to create a new item here, and it's just going to be a folder, right? We're going to give it a name of template job. So you know that as a developer, any engineer that's logging into this controller and accessing that folder, we know has a specific set of pipeline templates that should only be run within that folder. And you as the administrator are able to set that here within CloudBees, and we'll see how we can actually do this as code as well, creating these folders, entire items as code that can be available on day 0 as well. So for now, we'll just kind of show you how that would happen.
Hey, Ian.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, while you're doing that, we had a quick question, and I wasn't sure, so I want just to double check with you. What's the best way to get a free trial of the CloudBees CI? Is it just request that through the Operations Center?
Yeah, I think that the best way to get a free trial of CloudBees, and I believe that there might have actually been some links prepared for this workshop, but off the top of my head, I want to say that we have some maybe some options available through AWS. I might have to circle back specifically on what those options are and get back to this specific attendee.
Yeah, I think the AWS option may be a little bit longer than requesting it through the Ops Center. So ignore the link that I shared on the comments. I think the link I shared was actually for a separate product. But you can request it once you download it and set up the Cloud Operations Center.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Sheng. So we are in the process of creating this folder for our pipeline template jobs, right? And we'll scroll to the bottom of its configuration. And if we take a look, we can just restrict what types of children items can actually be created here. And I'll see what the workshop instructions want us to actually do, what we want to make available. And it looks like it's just a couple of the pipeline templates. So, for this particular folder, we might just have some engineers working on some Maven builds, and okay, we want this CloudBees CI configuration bundle template available too. We'll save that. And folder's empty. We have nothing created here yet. If we wanted to, we now only have these 2 options available. So even if you wanted to, you physically could not create anything other than a Maven or a configuration bundle pipeline template within this folder. And that is really, that just about wraps up the first lab. And again, we've basically set up a pipeline template catalog that can be consumed, right, by our developers, by whoever really needs access to them. And we're governing those, by the use of a folders plus feature with the ability to restrict those templates. So within that same folder, what we'll actually do is create a job, right? This multi-branch job that will effectively provide us with a GitOps approach for making configuration changes to this particular controller. An extremely powerful way to being able to manage your Jenkins instances is with configuration as code. Not only can we, track that within source control, right? But we have this standardized sort of configuration bundle that you can apply and reuse across your cluster as you need to. And there's some really cool inheritance capabilities that we will directly discuss in the configuration as code lab. That's coming up next. But what we want to do is at least get that job set up and properly prepared. So we want to create a config bundle operations job. And this is actually going to be coming from the pipeline template that we have defined. And before we actually click OK, we'll take a look at that specific pipeline template within, that we have stored within source control. So we saw all of these templates available on our controller, but we actually didn't see the contents of them. And that's the magic, right? That's the meat of why pipeline templates are so powerful. So we can take a look at the configuration as code bundle pipeline template. And every single pipeline template, it consists of two files. This YAML manifest, where we might have the definition of the particular job and some input parameters, right? So as I stated, these can be used with multi-branch jobs. They can be used with standalone pipeline jobs, right? And we're about to see all of these parameters populate once we click OK here. So I'll do that, and what's going to happen is, me as the developer, I can, or actually as the administrator, right, I'd probably be setting up this job. I can come in here and very quickly input some parameters to get this set up and provisioned correctly. So we can kind of discuss these, right? And these are defined here within this template.yaml file. And a couple of the attributes have some default values that we set for our GitHub repository, how we're actually authenticating to it using an app credential, which, by the way, provide really flexible server-to-server rate limits as opposed to personal access tokens. Now, all we need to do here is plug in the name of our organization. So iCurt CBCI at scale in AWS. And then we can save this, right? But before I do that, let's take a look at the actual Jenkins file, the pipeline that's going to be updating the configuration as code bundle for us. So we've seen the input parameters. Now let's take a look at the actual pipeline. So, okay, what are we doing here? This is actually going to pull in the pipeline library, the shared library that we have defined at the root level of our GitHub organization in this repository. So this has a series of variables, these groovy variables that we can just easily call within our declarative pipelines, as opposed to scripting that entire thing out in a really poorly written workflow, we can just call those variables as we are here. So we're pulling in that pipeline library. So we have all of those variables, we have all of those resources available for this centralized sort of pipeline. And you'll actually notice that we don't have the Jenkins file stored within where the application code is. So you can have this centralized repository of really well-architected pipelines used across the enterprise, across all consumers of these workflows. Now, might be just setting some a timeout parameter here, and here is what we want to see. So we're going to be updating the configuration as code bundle for our controller, and we're actually using the Kubernetes plugin to specify a pod template to use specifically for this operation, right? And those, again, we have defined as shared library resources. So if we take a pause on that, what's extremely powerful is not only the use of shared libraries with these pipeline templates, but if you can define your agent pods as shared library resources and ultimately call those within your pipelines, that is an extremely powerful way of being able to distribute your workloads. Then we have a when directive here, right? And alrighty, we're going to copy over the configuration as code bundle that we have stored on Operations Center. And we're going to copy it over to this controller. And it's all happening, all defined within this configuration bundle template. So we're ready to go, right? Let's update this cask bundle. And it's going to run, right? Because this is a multi-branch configuration. So it's going to scan the main branch of our repository, and we can actually take a look at what it found. So interesting. This is finding 6 branches for us. So it looks like we actually have about 4 or 5 pull requests already created, but no branch, right? And why is that? We'll actually be digging into why that is, right, within the configuration as code lab. You might have noticed within the template.yaml file that we are leveraging a marker file, right? And this didn't actually exist. So because this marker file doesn't exist, no branches were created. So that's a really cool way of being able to tell CloudBees CI, hey, if this particular file doesn't exist within the target repo, then I'm not, I don't want a new branch created for my multi-branch project. This can be a pom.xml. It can be a Gradle settings file, whatever sort of properties you want to ensure is defined within that repository. So what we've done within that first lab, right, we've set up an entire catalog of really well-written pipeline templates that can be very easily consumed by the developers of the solution. Now what we're going to do is enforce a GitOps sort of philosophy for managing all of the changes that we make as administrators to this CloudBees CI instance. So as we just saw, we've got a series of pull requests that we're going to work off of that have already been generated for us that are actually going to be making those changes across those YAML files, right? And I guess what we can do is just sort of walk through what those files represent. So I'll navigate back over to the slides that we're using, and just kind of talk through those different files. Before that, configuration as code makes your life as an administrator seamless. By capturing all of the information within the UI in a set of configuration files as code within source control, you can effectively treat your system as an artifact. Hey, here's the first version of our CloudBees controller, V2, V3, as many major changes as you make to that. And that can also be wrapped into your change management process, so that in the event you get dinged on some audits, internally, externally, you can rely on CloudBees configuration as code to be that source of truth for your CI environment. And that source of truth is made possible through all of these different manifests here. As we talk through these, I'd like to do that in source control, right? So within our config bundle repository, here are all those files. We have a bundle.yaml file, and this is just a version for our config bundle. It also is important in the notion that it's an index file. So it references everything else we need for our controller, right? Everything we want defined as code, we're going to reference within this bundle.yaml file. So this is the first version of it, right? And we have only a few files that we're referencing for plugins, for maybe our global settings and our instance configuration, which is based on the JCask plugin. And then we might have a plugin catalog, and we'll discuss exactly what that is momentarily. So that's our bundle.yaml file. Okay, cool. We had already sort of, gotten a foundation for the information captured in our Jenkins.yaml file. It contains your entire CI configuration, and supported CloudBees plugins. So, the addition of the pipeline policy, authorization, I believe, is set here, or we're about to set it, right? But you can see just how much you can capture within this file. And we'll actually be going through the changes we'll be making to these within that first pull request. Okay. So that's the Jenkins.yaml file. And then we have our plugins. So since we know we have the CloudBees Assurance Program enabled, all of these plugins here are going to be on the most secure, up-to-date versions that are compatible with CloudBees CI, and our specific version that we're running CloudBees CI on. Hence, the need to provide versions for these is completely absent. We don't need to do that. And you might be wondering, okay, but what about the plugins that aren't verified, that aren't curated, that we still need to use? And we're trying to figure out how to get off of those plugins, but we still need those for our environments. That's the concept that a plugin catalog sort of employs. And that's, again, where you'll see the version called out for the plugins that don't live within the CloudBees Assurance Program yet. And these would also be referenced within that plugin.yaml file as well. What am I getting at? We want you to use the tools that make sense for your environments, that are strategically fit to deliver your application code. So we want you to embrace, not replace. And that's a common mantra you'll find along the different solutions of our platform. Alrighty.
Hey, Ian.
Yes, Shang.
Yeah, we had a comment on the side here, and I'm not sure this question, how we can best address it, but can we run this lab in open source Jenkins is how it was asked. But I think the goal here, of course, is to kind of demonstrate the scalability and the way that CloudBees CI can best provide the policies as the configurations as code, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about what CloudBees CI provides, outside of you just using open source Jenkins.
Absolutely, that's a great question. I'd be, if I were watching this in the audience, I'd also be wondering, hey, how much of this can I do in open source without having to pay for an enterprise platform? Almost none of it, right? So the entire concept here of Operations Center is not available in open source. So the sort of seamless ways that we're incorporating these configuration as code bundles, these pipeline templates across all of these controllers, a lot of that is done through Operations Center, right? When you start to think about the different files that we saw here, inheritance and using the CloudBees assurance program for a heightened level of security for your instance, not just for plugins, but for the actual image that you might be using. A lot of this just can't be done in open source, and that's exactly why CloudBees CI exists.
Yeah, and I would almost add that the manageability, right, the operations of it, the visibility, right, we get all the reporting and the auditing. I mean, there's just so much more to this that we just don't have the time to show today, of course. But imagine a dashboard that you can hand off to a DevOps manager or your CTO or IT manager to see some of the pipelines that are being ran, and all those things that you may have to pull in another tool or pull in another third-party integration to do. It's all part of this tool. And what's great about this is we're actually just showing you one piece of the greater platform, right? CI is certainly one piece that we support, and Ian is shown here with CDRO and analytics, and then we also have feature management and compliance coming. So there's a whole platform around DevOps and DevSecOps, right, that we're trying to solve. So this is really a smaller piece of the greater puzzle.
That's a great point. Hopefully we have the opportunity to come back and present a lot of those, other capabilities with DevOps.com. But, as you saw in the beginning, what we're doing today is just the first module. And to Sheng's point, we cover a lot of other scenarios for different personas in the second module and beyond. We have, other workshops, but that's a great point, Sheng. And we can also continue to do whatever we have in open source Jenkins today with CloudBees CI, right? A lot of those functionalities are compatible. The use of pipelines, right? The idea of agents, a lot of that can be carried over. We just do Jenkins better at scale, right? So thank you for the question. Getting back to the initial part of the configuration as code lab, we just took a look at exactly what the files represent, right? So if I took a look, and I'll go back, use the breadcrumbs here to the root level of my controller, I can actually, go back here and, okay, not yet. So we don't have, oh yes, no, we do. I just missed it. If we took a look at our configuration as code export and update page, we could see those exact same files, right? And this is really, really cool. I'll spend about a minute on this tab here because this gives you your entire configuration. So even if you have certain things configured as code, certain things might not be, what this would be able to do is give you an entire representation of your controller. Everything, right? And what you would be able to do is literally download those, export those files in zip format and create a new configuration bundle based on this. Right now, here are the bundles that we're using, right? But really just wanted to show you that this is where you would, within the user interface, gain the information into your bundles. So I'll go back to that particular multi-branch job where we're pulling in those new changes based off of the event-based commits. And we know that the first pull request is going to be related to all of those changes that we're making. So we take a look here at this fork icon, and this is going to spit us right out into that related pull request. We do not want to merge this right away. What we want to be able to do is take a look at what was changed, right? What are we adding? What changes are we making to our controller that, I want to be made aware of as the admin who is going to be merging this pull request into the main branch? We actually, if we take a look here, you'll see that the project actually, it processed our PRs. We just don't have a branch, to create it off yet. So we're reviewing the changes here. And within that index file, right, our bundle.yaml, we're incrementing versions to denote that this is basically an upgrade or an update to the bundle. And here we go. We are adding an items.yaml file, which is something I'll speak to right now, I guess. This file right here allows you, and this is optional, extremely powerful, contains configuration for items to be created on your managed controller, one of which we created manually, that folder by the name of template jobs. And you can create all of the different properties, you can define that entire configuration we did in the UI here within the items.yaml file. And we're adding that to the bundle. Jenkins.yaml, what's going on here? So, okay, we're just, within the system message saying that, hey, there was a configuration is code bundle update, and we're now on the second version of this controller, okay? Oh, what's going on here? So we have an entirely new pod template that we're going to be defining as code within the Jenkins.yaml file. So this could be used to define maybe a container that we want an agent to be used with, right? And in this case, we're basically defining a Maven agent to use for that, one of our pipeline templates. An entire pod template configuration we can store as code. And lastly, within this pull request for, sort of our GitOps approach to our bundle update, we're adding a plugin. So we'll be installing the CloudBees pipeline policies plugin for use in the next lab. All right, pretty straightforward. So we'll go back to the conversation here and just ensuring that I'm following along. We reviewed all of this information, right? And really now what we want to do is merge that. So we'll take a look, and I might have been revealed too much there already, just in terms of what might happen here. But this should ideally reach out to a Kubernetes agent that we have configured for the pipeline and execute these updates. So let's merge it. We'll confirm that it looks good, and the branch will get deleted for us, cleaned up. So let's take a look at what's happening. I'll refresh this page. There we are. And it actually cleaned up this multi-branch project, deleted that PR here for us as well. And we can actually click into this main branch. Here's the stage view. And again, it's going to be using that pipeline template that we had covered and very briefly explained when we took a look at the pipeline template. And that is within this repository. Here's our configuration as code bundle. And these are the steps it's going to perform, right? So it's just going to create a folder on our controller, and we're actually using Kubernetes, right? This is hosted in EKS. We're actually using Kubernetes to copy that bundle from Operations Center, in particular to this namespace, over to our controller, which is interesting. So namespaces might be taking a bit of priority here. If we take a look, there is a failure. So interesting. We created the folder fine. We were able to find the bundle, but we actually, it doesn't look like kube control was actually allowed to make that change. So what's really, really cool with CloudBees CI Modern is you can leverage, network policies for your pods so that, only certain pods can talk to one another. And in this case, it looks like, our service account for this particular controller could not access, or the service account for Operations Center could not access our namespace for this controller. So that, network policies can get very, very intricate, but that's exactly why this failed. So let's fix it. I'll just navigate back here, and we want to be able to just update our configuration as code bundle for this controller, right? We want to go from V1 to V2. So let's take a look at, and we know why it failed, right? It looks like, we just don't have the right permissions from a Kubernetes perspective to be able to do this. And why is that, right? You might want a dedicated controller with the right permissions to only be able to make that change. Just kind of, communicating the best practices of Kubernetes networking and how that can help you actually manage changes to your CI environments in a large scale approach. So let's navigate back to that pipeline template, right? And we're going to actually make a change to it so that this won't fail. I'm going to copy this entire code snippet, and I'm going to navigate back to the pipeline template catalog for this particular event. And I'm replacing this entire thing. And this is on the main branch, right? So let's take a look at, potentially what has changed here. We actually added a step. So this is going to, and we're still using a shared library that we have configured globally, remember. We're using one of those shared library variables to actually parse this JSON event. So if we take a look, and this explains it a little bit better here, right? This pipeline library here, in conjunction with this publish event step, is actually going to send a notification out to Operations Center, and that's going to result in any, the triggering of any job that's basically configured to listen for that event. In our case, it's going to be the triggering of a job on a controller that has the permissions to make this change. So really, really cool sort of way we're using shared libraries. We're using an event trigger to actually securely make a configuration change to a controller. And we'll make a commit here. We added the GitHub parse origin URL variable and the publish event step. We are going to commit that directly to the main branch. And we'll navigate back over and wait for this to kick off. Oh, And you know what? It's not going to automatically kick off because we have an event trigger. And since that event trigger hasn't actually run yet, we're going to kick off this build by ourselves, right? And again, that's going to reach out to Operations Center with that JSON payload. And so any job, right, any pipeline that's configured to listen to that particular payload that we're sending is going to execute this pipeline. And as a result, right, we should have all of those new changes, a new plugin. We should have that Kubernetes pod template available. And we should also see that our folder was defined as code using that items.yaml file. From failure to success in one job. That I wish I could say the same for my previous role when I used Jenkins. But in terms of what we see here, it's a lot different and it's a lot better. So it's going to make a checkout, to our repository, and here's that event that we just configured within that Jenkins file. And it actually comes, right, this comes from our controller, right, to Operations Center, basically raises its hand and says, hey, I want to update my bundle. Here's the ID of it, and here's the name of my controller. So, we get a sort of the build info, the job information. So let's see if we have a new bundle available on this controller. And we certainly should. So if we take a look at the configuration as code export and update page, bada boom, there is a new configuration available for us. And you're like, Ian, we're doing all of this in the UI. Can we just automatically, apply and reload a bundle as code? The answer is yes. So what we're just kind of showing you, how to do this, and we're just ensuring that you have, a fundamental concept of how this works. But you can surely automate how you reload your bundle. We're going to do this manually because we want to see the changes. We want to finally see that everything that we just enforced using a GitOps approach, using a PR-based strategy, is now actually loaded onto our controller. So this is just going to perform a hot, or no, I guess it isn't a hot reload, but no downtime is being experienced here. And that's, while it's doing this, kind of the beauty of Kubernetes, right? We can take a look, and we know we have a PVC bound. Here's our stateful set, and we're just basically, we want one replica. So if we see this go to 0 out of 1, hey, we know that our controller's probably hibernating. But really cool view you can get here within Operations Center to actually take a look at the Kubernetes provisioning for your particular controller. You can specify your storage class, and then you'll actually see the stateful set generated for your controller as well. Okay, so let's take a look. And we can really verify that we are on those, this version 2 of our controller a few different ways, one of which, boom, we're on version 2. So at the very least, we know that it made the change to the system message. But let's take a look at the pod template that we just added, right? And this is going to be used for any pipeline that specifies the Maven label for a particular container block. This didn't exist before, and with that change that we just made with configuration as code, we now have an entirely new pod template available. We have that and our pipeline policy. What Well, we don't necessarily have a policy created yet, so we'll dig into that very shortly, but now we know the plugin is at least installed and we have what we need on this controller. And we are ready to hit the ground running with the next lab. And that's just going to show us how to use pipeline policies. The idea of pipeline policies, they allow you, again, to sort of enforce standards for maybe the duration of a particular pipeline. The idea is to increase throughput, and having something that might not have a timeout, that you don't have the right visibility into or the right controls configured for, it can cause a lot of technical debt for your CI environment. So ensuring that you have these policies configured properly at a global level can really, really help ensure that the health of your CI environment. Were there any questions, I guess, on the previous lab, Shang? I want to make sure that I'm doing my job.
No, it's pretty quiet thus far. So yeah, anyone out there, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them on chat, and we'll try to get those answered.
Yes, please do. If there were any questions on configuration as code, there was a lot to cover there in a short amount of time. So definitely reach out. If you have any lingering questions on Cask. We still have 2 labs to go, so we have those 4 pull requests now to work off of. We closed one of them, right? Now, basically what we want to do within this lab is enforce the use of a global timeout parameter within a particular pipeline. And we'll sort of test that out towards the end of the lab, see if that's actually applying correctly. So let's go right on back over to our configuration as code repository in our GitHub org. And there they are, the 4 pull requests that we just saw. Now, this is actually going to be the pipeline policy. So pull request number 2, right? And being a good reviewer, I'm going to come in here and take a look at what was changed within our configuration as code bundle. So what's happening here is we're, again, incrementing the version of our bundle, and we're actually adding a global pipeline policy to the Jenkins.yaml file. So, basically the policy, if a pipeline ran over, I believe 30 minutes is the default duration here, it would fail. And that's a lot of time, right? So we might want to shorten that, but at the very least, we want to be able to create a global policy. And again, we're still using configuration as code to make all of these changes. Version controlled history of your CI environment. So that was very straightforward. We can just, I think we're pretty much good to merge that to the main and then reload our configuration bundle. So we'll do that. Let's merge this pull request. And the pipeline policies lab, that branch was just deleted for us, as it should have been. And now we know that, and we see something going on in our build queue. Our multi-branch project was automatically kicked off as a result of those files being changed. And if we took a look, I am a very old school Jenkins user that loves to navigate to the console output just to kind of see what's going on. But we can just as easily stay here and take a look at the logs within the stage view of the pipeline, and it's much cleaner, right? You can sort of navigate to particular stages within the pipeline. And our second success has just occurred. So we have that new configuration available. So when I reload, we should be on V3. And again, we've just simply added a new pipeline policy. Oh, and this might actually have automatically reloaded for us. Want to ensure that this was able to take a look at where I merged this. And it was to main, so I'll just verify that my Jenkins.yaml file has the pipeline policy. It does. And we should have a new bundle available. Oh. So let's take a look at this again. So what happened is, I may need to just do a quick restart on this controller. And this is actually, so if we take a look on Operations Center, we can basically view what I had just shown you on the configuration page, right? So it's going to the replica set should spin down, and this will just perform a quick restart. I'm not quite sure what had happened with that change to the Jenkins.yaml file. May have been something with the interaction between Operations Center and CloudBees CI. So we can, this is interesting.
And while Ian's doing that, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments. We've got another probably about 15 minutes remaining here, so love to answer any open questions.
Absolutely, yes, and apologies for the technical hiccup. It appears there's
No. Why don't you kind of talk to how you were able to set up CloudBees inside the AWS environment? What that looks like. Is that fairly easy to do? I know it's Kubernetes, of course, but is there anything specific on the AWS side that had to be done, or was it pretty simple and straightforward?
it was, and we, it's a great question, Shane, because we have a lot of reference architecture, not only across AWS but elsewhere, and specific to AWS. There's for this cluster, I really just leveraged Terraform to do that, and that can be EKS control, right? Whatever you need to do to create the cloud resources is extremely straightforward. And being able to install CloudBees is probably even easier to do with Helm, right? So you basically just create a values.yaml file, right, for Operations Center. You can create one for your controllers if you wanted those to adhere to a certain spec for persistent volumes or other data associated with the controller, maybe a configuration as code bundle, or a certain config map. And all of that, right, managed through Helm makes it very, very easy to install Operations Center. And then, right, you have the idea of managed controllers. If I were to log back in as the admin, you would very, very easily be able to just spin up a new controller on demand right here. So I could click this button, and all.
Yeah, and this is probably the power of CloudBees, right, versus say open source Jenkins, being able to do this just on demand.
On demand, right, through the user interface.
Yeah.
And you might have even noticed too that within our config bundle repo, holy crap, we can define an entire controller, as a YAML manifest.
Yeah, and even without Kubernetes, certainly things can be a little bit more complex or a little bit more manual, I'd say. We do support VMs and even on physical servers if you really wanted to, right? So certainly Kubernetes will make us so much easier and more scalable. The auto scaling and all the things you can take advantage of on the cloud infrastructure or in a Kubernetes container environment. But certainly we also do support running in other kind of non-kube environments as well. So
100%, that's a good call too,
yeah.
Shane. I've installed CloudBees in Azure VMs on EC2, and this is by and large my favorite way of hosting CloudBees CI.
Yeah.
Just because of, as you have seen through a lot of these labs today, it's makes your life as an administrator extremely straightforward, while providing the flexibility.
Yeah, so a lot of our customers now are kind of moving over to the cloud, right, and kind of developing cloud native inside of AWS.
Yeah.
What percentage of customers that you're seeing are still just kind of running it on-prem? Maybe it's because of security, or maybe they just don't, haven't had the chance to or opportunity to move to the cloud yet. Is that still kind of 50-50, or are you seeing more cloud than on-prem? What are you seeing out there these days?
It's a great question, Shay. I typically see more teams, and a lot of the software organizations that we work with are obviously taking a large leap into the cloud. And even certain healthcare companies, a lot of organizations across the board, I think, are prioritizing cloud strategies for different types of workloads, right? For their tool chain, for the applications that they support, and where I've seen a lot of, I guess, apprehension to the cloud is for a lot of physical infrastructure tied organizations that might be doing grid networking or might have to stay within a data center. But I think that's the beautiful thing of our platform is we allow you to manage your legacy solutions to connect to the on-premise DCs that you need to, while still being able to operate hybridly, across AWS, across those services that you need to engage with. So it's very, again, I think the deployment of the solution is very flexible.
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? Because I think I'd say majority is still running hybrid, right? Because
Yeah.
even though you try to move almost everything to cloud, there's probably that 10% that's still running like, COBOL or something on the mainframe that you just can't move over to the cloud unless you really doing some heavy refactoring, right? So, yeah, certainly. So, yeah, certainly. I mean, using CloudBees, you mentioned the healthcare kind of type of customers. We definitely see they've been a little bit of the laggard, right, moving to the cloud. But even the healthcare hospitals and healthcare providers now are also moving into the cloud
Right.
because of some of the toolings that we provide, right. With our platform, you can actually get continuous delivery and be able to check for compliance. And automate that entire fashion, right? Kind of doing some monitoring with Nagios or CloudWatch or the sort, right? To make sure that you're HIPAA compliant, or if you're in retail, make sure you're PCI compliant, right? All of that is now built in to the tool, so that you can make sure you're follow all the industry standards, right? So it certainly makes the cloud transformation, or the
Yeah.
migration to the cloud, a little bit easier. So,
Absolutely, 100%. I think that's really one of the best ways to put it.
yeah.
Because we realize that not every team needs to go into the cloud fully, right? They might have a foothold in a hybrid model indefinitely, and we make that very, very easy. What I'm going to do, I really restarted the controller, and I kicked off this configuration as code bundle job again. There seems to be an issue with the bundle itself. As you saw, we're reaching quite the amount of controllers here. Now that's not the issue. It appears as though there very well could be just something happening with Operations Center and my managed controller specifically around the availability pattern. Now, this is also an area, right, in Operations Center where you can basically define a base or a sort of default configuration bundle that each and every new controller can pick up on day 0 as soon as it's installed. So you can provision new controllers with entire configuration as code bundles that might be able to resonate really well with what that environment, with what that team needs. So this was a success, and I'll navigate back here to the top level of our controller. And I just want to verify one thing within the pipeline template catalog. And that was that we didn't specify a hot reload. Yes, okay. So I believe we still specified that as false, and just checking the previous lab to ensure that we didn't want to change that. Okay. We're looking good there. So I can take a look and check out our bundle update, and it appears as though our configuration as code bundle took a bit of a dive. That's fine. I think what we really wanted to cover within this particular lab was that pipeline policy, right? So this is as a result of that configuration as code bundle update. We really would have seen a new timeout policy. Again, that's just 30 minutes, and that's a lot, right? We would probably want to shrink that down to a lesser number, something more applicable to how stages actually execute. And the pipeline we're actually using for the cask bundle, right? That's 60 minutes. So we want to set that to anything less than 30, right? What we have globally set. So that's really the change that we're making within this particular lab, and showing you how that executes. And obviously, since we're making a change to a pipeline template, that would require that's basically going to import the new version of it. And that's why I had emphasized that in the very beginning of the workshop, was that, not only do we have this catalog defined as code, but it's basically configured to reach out for any new changes to these templates and apply those to each and every job on the controller. so that we don't have to go across those job configurations and manually, make those changes. They're automatically applied. And so the result of this, lab in particular, sort of results in a success based off of that new timeout value. And this can really, really help drive how your pipelines are ultimately defined, right? And in this case, where you might have a Jenkins file, this pipeline template stored within this repository, this centralized repo that can just be, imported onto a controller as it needs to be. And we are on the last and pretty interesting lab with respect to wrapping up the managing CI at scale workshop. And that's really about how we can delegate administration using like a role-based access control strategy. And we can, again, use configuration as code to do that. Since we're experiencing some issues with the cask bundle, we might not be able to actually see some of these live, but we can actually take a look at Operations Center, and we saw this in the very beginning where my view as Kurtz is very much different than my view as the administrator. And that's just kind of what we're doing here at the controller level within this lab, is delegating some admin permissions to the users that we've created. And really what we want to do to be able to do that is opt out of the authorization strategy set globally, right? We want to create our own sort of RBAC matrix. Us being the team that is really paving the way in CI/CD in the organization. We don't really need the oversight, of that global auth strategy. We can create our own, right? We're doing things correctly. That's what we're doing here. So, in Operations Center, I'll come back, and we basically want to go to the manage page of our controller, the configuration page of it. And we'll scroll down past all of the sort of provisioning details for our Kubernetes cluster. And we'll see that, maybe that's why. So it appears as though my configuration as code bundle got changed. So we'll set it back to what it should be. And we actually want to enforce authentication only, right? We want to create our own RBAC strategy. So we can save this and apply it. And we can now create our own RBAC strategy. So that's what we'll do. And I believe we have a PR to view those changes through. So within our configuration as code bundle repository, again, we'll take a look at that pull request for the RBAC updates. And it looks like we're changing 3 files. So our bundle.yaml is changing from v3 to v4. Our Jenkins.yaml is, just changing the system message. Doesn't look like anything else is happening there. And we're adding an entirely new YAML manifest to handle RBAC. So kind of talking through that, right? If, we're defining some roles here. These are just some system-generated roles. Here's our administrator role. They can do everything, right? We might have a manager role. So, it's kind of walking through the different configurations here. Everything you do within the UI, right, you can sort of track here your roles, your groups, your users, and their permissions. So that's the change that we're making to our configuration as code bundle, so that if I log in as iKurtz admin, right, I should be able to do anything I want. But now, as the user that I'm currently logged in with, I wouldn't be able to see nearly as much as I would being an admin. I would just be a manager, right? So we'll see that once we merge this pull request into the main branch and then reload the configuration as code bundle. Let's do it. We'll merge this pull request. And we are going to take a look at config bundle ops job, and it's running. So once this completes, right, we should be able to update our configuration as code bundle and see those latest changes, maybe switch between these roles and identify, the different views, right? What's available, what can I see, what can't I see? And again, we're seeing how quickly we can do all of this using configuration as code and that sort of GitOps methodology for managing CI. So, okay, a successful sort of configuration as code, it's been applied to our controller. Now let's see if we have an update. Yeah, and it appears we're still having some issues with the configuration as code bundle. If I took a look at the configuration of it again here. Oh, yeah, it looks like there's, and that could be an issue with the availability pattern, like I said. So if I log back in here as the admin, should be able to take a look at that particular bundle. So the bundle for my controller, and I can take a look at the availability pattern set for it. So that's going to be iKurtz. Yep. So it should be picking that up. Looks like we're just experiencing an abnormal issue with respect to actually reloading the configuration as code bundle. Effectively, we'd switch between, and going back to my controller, different roles, right? So I would log out, and with those new RBAC permissions, log back in as iKurtz admin with the same password. And funny enough, iKurtz admin doesn't yet have the administrator permissions because of some of the CASC related issues. But now I can just, go back to oh, no, this is still Operations Center. Yeah, so if I logged in as iKurtz admin, ideally I would just be able to, have a lot more permissions available than I would as the manager role. And that is, sort of how you actually delegate role-based access control through CloudBees CI. And, having a central sort of config bundle, and taking a look at what that is here in Operations Center, we can kind of get an idea of why we would want to do that. So these, this page right here, right, this base bundle, we could ideally set for every controller, or they can have their own sort of bundle that makes sense for their environment. Whatever the case, you don't have the visibility into this. In open source and Operations Center helps you tie everything together as far as how to, automate the management of your CI environments at scale. So I'll take any questions on these labs if there are within the comments. Really appreciate you spending your time with Shang and I today, as well as Cody on the Techstrong team. We just covered the first module of this workshop, and that is, again, for you as the administrator, how can I do this better? How can I automate a lot of this? How can I get the proper governance in place for my CI environments? And hopefully you've seen a lot of how you can do that today with CloudBees CI in AWS. Module 2 awaits, hopefully at a later date.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I think we're a little bit over on time, but any questions at all? Don't see any in the comments block.
Okay.
Cody, I think we're good.
All right. Well, Ian, Shang, thank you both for being here with me. I've got just a couple things to announce before we officially close out. But I would like to remind everyone that this session was recorded. So you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. We do have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. Our first winner is Wayne L. Our second winner is Venus H. Our third winner is Kareem D. Our fourth and final winner is Mahesh R. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't receive an email, just check your spam folder. I'd like to thank AWS and CloudBees for sponsoring today's webinar. And thank you to Ian and Shang for being here from CloudBees and actually providing all of this content and filling your afternoon with all this info. So once again, Ian, Shang, thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Cody.
My pleasure.
And before we close out, who would I be without thanking our audience? So to all of our attendees, everyone following along, thank you so much for being here. We hope to see you at a future upcoming Techstrong Learning webinar or workshop. But otherwise, just have a great rest of your day. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks all.